And with us this week is location scout and filmmaker David O'Reilly. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Oh, just fantastic.
Doing good.
You know, I've been very excited to talk with you because, you know, uh, David's work sends him, of course, all over the world. I'm sure, but not only that, he has directed a short film that I was not aware of, and I blame this on myself a little bit because I'm not a super Kubrick fan, but this kind of makes me want to be more of a Kubrick fan after watching it.
Good.
And he did a film called Kubrick by Candlelight, and it's directed by him, and it's a romantic comedy set around the kind of behind the scenes of the film Barry Lyndon, which is a famous kind of Stanley Kubrick film. But yeah, it's a wonderful film, and we're really glad to have you here to talk about that and all the location scout work that's, like I said, sends you around the world. So there's my intro. And Andrew, hey, how you doing? You're here
I'm
too.
doing good. I'm doing good. I'm just watching you stumble your way through this.
It happens sometimes when
No, it's fun.
No, it's
actually
part of
went
my
very
charm,
well.
right?
The way you understated the whole idea of Barry Lyndon, which is considered like Kubrick's masterpiece, and you said
that's the only way I can talk about it because I've never seen it. So
that's another thing, and it's just like just a little movie directed by a little director known as Stanley Kubrick.
It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm on the opposite spectrum when it comes to Steven, when it comes to Stanley Kubrick. If some people were to come up to me and be like, "Hey, favorite movie director of all time," Stanley Kubrick would probably be my instant answer. That's how much I loved it. I went through that whole phase where you just get into someone's filmography and you get so entrenched in it that you watch everything that's in it. You watch all of the behind the scenes making of stuff, all the documentaries, all this kind of stuff. And of course, there's endless things about Stanley Kubrick. I guess since we're on a Stanley Kubrick kick, we should ask David what kind of drew him. I'm assuming David is a Stanley Kubrick fan.
Yeah,
it would be weird if you weren't.
Yeah, I can't stand it. But it's the same. It's interesting, really, isn't it? We all have our favorite filmmakers and directors, and we've all watched movies all the time. But it's strange. It's almost there's almost not. Well, I suppose there is a cult of Kubrick, but it's amazing how much side work is generated, including my own film, I suppose, but by his work. Now, I wonder. Now, that's obviously because the films are amazing. And he changed genres. He didn't, he spent a lot of time, so there was gaps in between. I think it's also because the eras and the eras that he was making films, there wasn't as much access to filmmakers, and also he very much controlled that access too. So I suppose in the gaps of that, people generated their own mythologies and ideas. But ultimately it's because the films are every single one of them is incredibly detailed, and you can kind of smell the passion and the research and the pain in each film, and with a different genre each time. It's sort of endlessly, you can tap into them endlessly, which is quite rare for any film. And I suppose that's why you ask directors or filmmakers to come back to those guys, to their film favorite directors. He always comes up because there's an element of fantastic, amazing craft work, but also the mystery in between it. It's almost like he's a magician as a director, and that's quite rare now to have anyone in the last 50 years that people do keep coming back to. It's a good 20 years plus since he died, and we're still, there's I just saw there's a season in some cinema in Los Angeles. I mean, everywhere around the world. The exhibition's still traveling around the world. I think it's the detail and the majesty of those movies. But so from my experience, I think I got into him quite young, and I think my access point, strangely, was Full Metal Jacket, because I think that's when I was watching videos or beginning to watch videos, and you know, quite young. That was a war movie, so that kind of attracted me. Of course, then you sit down and watch that, and you realize, like 2 hours later, you've been kind of brutalized to the point where you feel like you've been through the Vietnam War. But so that's an interesting point, access point, because I didn't know then. I mean, that came out, I suppose, at 87. So I probably didn't see it in 87, but I remember that's the first film I remember seeing and now realizing it was Stanley Kubrick. But it was coming out at a time when there was a lot of Vietnam films coming out, Platoon and all of that. So probably it was getting lost in amongst that for me. And then, of course, in retrospect, realized that it was this incredible 2-part film in some ways, technically amazing looking, but also brutally brutal, really. So that was my access point, but I don't remember feeling anything about Kubrick at that point, because you're young, you know, very young.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand. And then I think as I went through my teenage years, started getting into movies in a much more erudite, serious way. I suppose then you fall into 2001 and Clockwork Orange. Clockwork Orange is always that access point for teenagers, because even, you know, late 80s, 90s, it was, you know, it still felt, it hadn't even been, I don't think it had been re-released in media then, or, you know, but it was still sort of, you know, kind of secret goods in some ways, bizarrely, wasn't it? Which was amazing. And then obviously you expand out of that. Now, I didn't look at Barry Lyndon for a long time. I think that's what happens with Barry Lyndon. In amongst all of those amazing movies, people kind of skip it, or, you know, they're not fully aware of it in his work. And then when people do, they go, oh my God, that's the most amazing film I've ever seen in my life. And that's kind of forgotten. So it's amazing, isn't it? Between 2001, Shining, you know, like, oh, what's Barry Lyndon? Oh, it's only that incredibly amazing 3-hour movie. Which again, like I said at the beginning, is kind of rare, isn't it? We don't really have those people that are still generating column inches about their work and the gaps in between and what, you know, the subtext and what it all means. I think that's his amazing legacy, which I think few directors, you know, few filmmakers truly have. You know, they may have 1 or 2 great movies and that stains them, but he's kind of lucky. He's lucky every one of them hit, really.
I was just saying, part of the draw with Stanley Kubrick is indeed the fact that he only had a limited amount of films in his career. What was it, about a dozen, 13 theatrical films, and his career spanned over 40 years. Not, you know, most film directors, if they had given a 40-year time frame, would probably make, you know, 25, 30 movies. Who knows how many? But he was always very specific, very particular. You know, if you look at the dates between his films, years would go by, and in those years, he would be meticulously prepping for his next film. And Barry Lyndon is interesting to me because it's kind of like you said, David. It does get somewhat lost in his filmography. By lost, I mean like it's sandwiched in between A Clockwork Orange and The Shining, both films that are both kind of iconic in different ways. A Clockwork Orange being so bold, being an adaptation of a controversial novel, being a controversial film, even to this day, maybe even more so. And then you have The Shining, which is seemingly yet again another adaptation of a very famous novel, but also kind of like a staple of the horror genre in and of itself. So in the middle, you've got this epic 3-hour, you know, costume period piece that is a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of filmmaking and just everything in and of itself. And for those of you who don't know a lot about Stanley Kubrick, just diving into him is so fascinating, because even with Barry Lyndon, as I'm sure David knows, is like this was probably the closest he ever got to making his Napoleon biopic that he wanted. So it's set in in that similar time, but it is a fictitious story, and it's everything. It's satirical, it's biographical, it's political, it's so many different things. And yeah, it's such a unique film that's set like in the heart of his filmography. When it came to setting your short film, what made you choose Barry Lyndon and not one of his kind of other projects or behind the
Yeah,
scenes
I
things that he
mean,
had done?
I suppose the genesis of the project was we wanted to make a big scale, low budget. I mean, everyone does, doesn't it? But big scale, low budget short film, which kind of, the idea was that everything about it was not luxurious, but we kind of pushed it out the barrel to make it look like it cost $1 million, or that was the kind of general kernel of the first idea of making a short film. And I obviously a huge Kubrick fan, and I was lucky enough to work with some people that worked on Kubrick films, Shining and Barry Lyndon, and I always kept coming back. Obviously, I'm Irish heritage, always coming back to the story I had read and then mythologized of him filming in Ireland in 1973 and then getting this call from the IRA and then leaving the next day and never coming back. And that had always stuck in my head, that story. And obviously, as a person who works on film sets, I thought, is that how did that really happen, or how could that happen now? And I suppose he was powerful enough and scared enough that it did happen. It's always still a bit contentious about was it real? Was it a real phone call? But I know, and I've met the second AD of The Shining and Barry Lyndon and Michael Stevenson, who's a legend. He says, and he says he was the guy who picked up the phone, and he said it was 100% true. So with that in my head, I started to think, okay, I want to make a big movie. I work behind the scenes. I know behind the scenes. So it came in from different angles, really. A love of Barry Lyndon, a love of that story. And then I thought, how can I make a story about that myth or that, or the reality? So then I kind of came in with my sort of Romeo and Juliet style love story, which then originally was very mirrored in Barry Lyndon. So it was, and it's still a little bit there. And so like 4 points it came in from wanting to make a big film on a small budget, loving Barry Lyndon, loving that myth, and then trying to get it into a 18-minute story. So it came in from loads of different ways, and then I wrote the script. Then we got some funding from a local council in Ireland, where my mum and dad are from, which was kind of coincidence, but I suppose it worked out very well. And then we got the impetus to start, basically, because we got some upfront money to spend. I think I'm still paying for the film now, but so it was lots of different things came together. But obviously, ultimately, it was a love of Barry Lyndon, and also I suppose the theme behind by my film now is really as we've said, Barry Lyndon's like one of the most beautiful films ever shot, and it looks fantastic, and it's it's like a 17th century 18th century painting all the way through. Obviously I know, and you guys will know as well, and most people do know, I suppose, but the behind the camera, whatever film it is, whether it's Star Wars or Barry Lyndon, is absolute chaos, mud, dirt, overflowing toilets, bacon sandwiches, late nights, partying, affairs in hotels, the circus, behind that to get to that beautiful image is always just pure mayhem. You don't give now, I mean, the budgets are much bigger, but what business in the world would give 100 million or 200 million to creative people? No one. But the film industry does. Oh, there you go make that. And 9 times out of 10 the films that I've worked on in the last 20 years have been pure chaos, because that's what it is. It's always, there's not enough time, there's never enough money. You've got 200 creative people on the road, and all it comes down to is that box that we're in now, and what's on the other side. In the end, when the film comes out, no one ever remembers what happened behind the camera. So I always think about that with Barry Lyndon when I watch it, and that was the kind of main theme once I started writing was, oh my God, look how beautiful it looks. But I know they filmed in Ireland, and it must have been raining, and there must have been cars slipping all over the place and people falling into cow pats, and like, so, but no one ever sees that. And once the film is crystallized on celluloid and that's it, no one ever remembers. So it's obviously it's a knockabout comedy film, but I tried to put some themes within it. And there's a lot of talk about toilets and there's a lot of toilet jokes in my film to bring it down to my level, but that's kind of from an initial concept of a kind of prosaic behind the scenes, which is, it's just all mess and love, and you know what I mean, like it's. And when I started working and we started making it with the DOP, he tries, because he really wanted to recreate Barry Lyndon, and I said, well, ultimately what we're trying to do is make hot Lyndon, 70s Lyndon. So we're behind the camera, and it was probably quite fun. Everyone was drinking and having a great time. But yeah, so all of those are in the melting pot of my 80-minute film, and then obviously trying to make it funny, and then stupidly then trying to stick about 90 to 100 Kubrick references in there too. So I didn't make it easy for me or anyone on the crew, but hopefully, yeah. And then I suppose then it's not mine anymore; it's out. And
I was gonna say there are tons of Kubrick references in there, like direct lines from some of his other films. Was that difficult to like work that in? Did you feel like you had to do it, or did you just kind of organically like? There's, for example,
I think it organically it started. Go on, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, because there is one scene where two characters are fighting. Someone walks in and says, "There's no fighting in the war room," or something like that, and it's like that's a direct line from Dr. Strangelove, and it's
that was easy. That was easy.
That the easy one?
That saved me writing the script. It was like, I think, funny enough, that may be the one that I had right from the beginning, because I knew there had to be a kind of love story and a love rival, and then all good films have a fight in them, and then so I think somehow I don't think I worked back from that gag, which is, gentlemen, you can't fight in here, this is the wardrobe room. I mean, it was not a bad gag, but I think I didn't work back from it, but it sort of fit. That one fit very nicely. And then there's tiny ones that you'll never see. And last year a guy emailed me and he said, oh, I really want to watch your film, and it's like, okay. So I sent him the link, and he came back with something like 130 references. So I don't know where he got the extra 40 or 50, but it's quite a good list. But I know there's certainly like 90-ish, but he found 130. But some of them are like visual effects. So there's an old car in it, and our visual effects guy, who was a great Kubrick fan, put a little couple of numbers and letters references on the registration plate. So, and there's obviously lines which are, and some reviews of it are like, it's a bit too much, but I didn't think it was. I thought it was fun.
To be honest, the thing that works for this film is because that really well is because it is set understanding that Kubrick's a real person. It's not like set in some fictional time where a fictional place where Kubrick's not a thing. We're literally working on a Kubrick film, so making them references it makes sense because it's all Kubrick's on everybody's mind. They're working on Kubrick, so them making reference to Kubrick films is like kind of works. It doesn't doesn't seem weird that they're making references, even if they're not doing it on purpose. Like it's or that the cameras what you're doing as a visually is making reference or anything like that. It really just it just feels like a love fest. It feels like a love fest for this filmmaker, and that's what you want, especially when it's a short film. It's under a half an hour. Why not bolster it out with as much love for Kubrick as possible?
Right. And what was it always intended to be 18 minutes, or did you have like longer cuts that you had worked on and had to work it down?
It was pretty lean, to be fair. And we shot for about 4 days in Ireland. Then we shut down for lack of money, and then came back. And we knew then, because as you all know, there's a kind of montage in the middle, which is the other 80 minutes of my film if it was a feature. And then we didn't have enough because that really, that really takes time out of you. That doing a montage, if you've got 90 minutes of footage, is quite easy, but if you're creating a montage, I realized very quickly we didn't have enough. So then we did a couple of extra days in Shepperton Studios, of all places, like 4 months later. So roughly 4 or 5 days shoot. But yeah, and then it was quite lean. The first edit with Ben Leach, who was our editor, it wasn't far off it, to be honest. And ultimately now, in retrospect, I should have made it shorter, because half the festivals that you find out why you've been rejected, if you can, usually say, oh, it's too long. And it's not because it's too long for the film, because it's the length it needs to be. It's too long for them because they like to program 6 shorts an hour.
15. It's like 15 minutes, isn't it? It usually
so
like 15
I've
minutes.
always, I knew I was over the odds, and and we had a kind of nice credits, and there's a couple of references in the credits, but I felt like people had to be credited properly, Kickstarter people and people, so I wasn't going to just cut it short for that sake. But obviously everything could always be shorter. But to answer your question, Andrew, it was roughly always came in about there, really, because we were quite lean, and we had to, I storyboarded it all. We shot in the middle of December in Ireland, so it was kind of the problems that they would have experienced. We were like shooting with Irish people dressed as English soldiers, rain, short days, fog, like the whole, we were kind of like a microcosm of my own film story about their film. It was kind of a foreign crew shooting in Ireland, facing exactly the same issues, if you know what I mean. So it was really tough. So we literally, if I could, I certainly didn't do Kubrick levels of takes. We didn't have the time.
No,
you didn't want to get too. You didn't want to be. You didn't want to turn into Kubrick just to make this movie. That would be
no 125 takes. They must have loved you.
And I can, and honestly, I've been on lots of film sets with lots of directors. I can see how it happens. Because it's like I was saying, all this build up to that one moment where you switch the camera on and 2 actors or 500 actors have to work. It's quite a lot of pressure on everyone behind the camera, everyone in front of the camera. So I can see how you can go to 100 takes. If you can, I can see how you can do it, because if it's not right, it's going to be not right forever, so
yeah. It's a feeling you have, like when if it doesn't feel right, then and I think that's what I know about Kubrick. I think he's definitely a perfectionist, and he, I think for him, he had to feel right in the moment to feel like he got it. Like I think that's it. Most directors, like you want to feel like that it's almost like you're watching the movie already, and that you got it right there in that moment. And if you didn't get that feeling, then well, let's do it again.
Right. Well, I mean, it is advantageous now that you're shooting on digital versus film.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Doing 100 takes on film is a lot different than doing 100 takes on digital, in terms of monetary reasons. And yeah, it's a fantastic like love letter to Stanley Kubrick, to his work.
I do want to say I do. I'm sorry, Andrew. I do want, before I forget it, I do want to say that I fantasize how I do with a lot of films that I really like. And in this case, I do fantasize going along with it, there being more to it. Like Andrew was asking. I was telling him, I was pitching to Andrew what I think if the movie was longer, what it would be like. And I said, what would be great is if the movie was longer, it could be like a couple other Kubrick films to extend the love story. Like they only meet on the sets of other Kubrick films, and then by the end,
hang on,
like we,
right? It's a good idea. Yeah, but please. It's fascinating. Like
they're on the set of The Shining together, and then whatever the movies are around it. Like it would be interesting if the love story extended to them other sets and some of the stories behind them other films, and then at the end you kind of maybe like somewhat of a cliffhanger or like subtle way of knowing where the relationship goes. But with that, on top of that, the casting, really good chemistry. your two lead actors. If I
Yeah.
can get their name right here, Dara O'Toole and Amy Hughes.
That's right.
Both
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and Dara is from Tullamore, so that's where my parents are from, and that's where we shot, 99% of the film. So it was kind of a no-brainer. I'm an up-and-coming actor in the area and been on television in Ireland, so he was straight in. And then Amy, I had seen in a strangely similar kind of story. There was a thing on the BBC about the making of a sitcom in the 70s called Dad's Army. So it probably means very little to you, but it was a behind the scenes of a making of a sitcom. So it was set in the 70s, and she played a kind of secretary in it. And I saw her, and I thought, it was the right period. It was just something, and it was a comedy. So I kind of made a note, as if you're lucky enough to do, you go, okay, and I'll, if I've got something coming, I'll be good to see if she's around. Amazingly, she lives in Ireland, so she was the perfect scenario. But yeah, they had great chemistry. And yeah, to answer your question, and I've sort of have and am making a bigger Kubrick, writing a bigger Kubrick by Candlelight. I've left it mostly on Barry Lyndon, like script wise. But I actually totally agree. I think that would be a fantastic idea.
Hey, please. If you really like it, take it, please.
Take it. Take it, please.
Because obviously the montage in my film, in some ways, is kind of saying, "Hey, if you give me $100,000, I'll fill that gap in and make it 90 minutes." That was kind of, you know what I mean? Like 6 months passed within that kind of 2 minutes. And it was kind of suggesting that there was a bigger story to tell. And I'm sort of struggling with it, and I'm getting there. But yeah, that's not a bad idea.
I mean, what I think it does is it also adds, I think with a lot of great love stories, when there's some time between that love that, when they're together, that kind of helps reinforce the love bond. When they don't see each other for a while, kind of makes me think about the Before trilogy, where they don't see each other, between the first and the second film for many years. And then they finally meet again in the second film. And that love is still obviously there. That chemistry is still there.
Right. But it's different.
Yeah.
If you only met on the set of a Kubrick film, it would be fairly big gaps, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I was going to say,
the other thing.
Yeah. That's the other problem is like, yeah.
Steve and I were talking, between Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut is a 12-year. Is a 12-year gap between the movies coming out. Less time between the making ofs, but that actually probably ends up being the same if you end up kind of doing the math on that. But it's like where would the characters be 10, 12 years later? It's fascinating thought process.
Okay. That may shift the focus of my feature film script.
Oh Jesus! Look,
I'll do it.
Don't worry. I'll give you some residuals on the back of it.
Oh no! I just want
a shout out in the credits.
Shout out the credits and just get the movie made, man. Because I'll be really excited to see that and hopefully get the same cast back.
Yeah,
that cast is amazing.
Yeah. But isn't it interesting? Kind of the thing that we've been talking about is that we love the fact that he did so much research and took so long, but isn't it in some ways slightly sad that he did? Because if you think about that gap between Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, is like we know now from all of the books and documentaries, he had so many different shows on the go. It's like, oh my God, couldn't he have just maybe done some more that we couldn't? You know what I mean? Like it's sort of greedy of the consumer to go, oh my God, he died too young and really he left us an amazing legacy. Wouldn't it be amazing if he'd left us just one more thing? Or, do you know what I mean? Like I suppose it's the difference between someone like, and a kind of a friend of his at the time, but Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott has consistently made his films every few years. Now he seems to be on this kind of frenzy to make films every 5 minutes. Every couple of days. And I suppose maybe that's a kind of end of not life, but end of career kind of impetus, I suppose. And I've been lucky to work with Michael Mann 3 times. He takes very big gaps in between, like there's a lot of research and a lot of time. And also the bit that isn't very romantic, there's just hustling for the money to make these
Yeah.
shows. Like even those big guys are all hustling for money. And certainly now, it feels like it's boom time, but it's still very hard to get a film made.
Oh
If
yeah.
it's an original idea and it's outside of the box or outside of a brand, it's almost virtually impossible at some points to get money to make those. So it's interesting, isn't it? Like I was reading about After Sun, which I haven't seen, but the director Charlotte Wells was talking about, I don't think she, like, who's financing those films when I think the comment is once they're made and they start getting success, and of course they don't cost very much, so they make quite a bit of money, and then they get some Oscar nominations, everyone loves them and wants to talk about them, and producer going, oh, I love After Sun. But when it was being hawked around Soho or London or even Hollywood, probably no one wanted to know. So
Yeah.
but they always want that product, but they're not willing to stump up the small amount of capital to get them made, and
Yeah.
that's sad, because I know we're just generally in a branded IP world. I mean, look behind me, I live in a branded IP world, and I work I work in that world. But it's sad then that if Chris Nolan is our generation's Kubrick, because that could be a whole other show, then
Yeah.
I
he's
don't
kind of
disagree.
safe. He's kind of safe in the sense, they're letting him make the films that he wants to make. They also make good money, so that's why it works for him. He takes a long time in between each one, not as long as Kubrick. They're equally as researched and kind of complex, but they make a lot of money. And some of like Barry Lyndon didn't do particularly well at the box office, and so I suspect in between all of the research and thinking about movies is also that horrible hustling for money. So I'm sure Kubrick had to hustle for money, all the time. What do you want to make next? Clockwork Orange. I mean, now people, it just wouldn't happen, would it? So I suspect it's probably in one of the many books behind me, but everyone has to hustle. No one wants to make anything. Everyone wants to make everything.
And some people are not good at that. Like Kubrick. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I don't really know. But he comes off as somebody that maybe it would be a little awkward to try to do something like that. That they're really very much into being an artist, and to have to deal with the business side of filmmaking was probably difficult for him, which made it difficult for him to get movies made.
Sure. It's interesting. Most of the directors now, Christopher Nolan is pretty savvy business wise. Michael is definitely, like they're all producers.
Chris Nolan also works with his wife too, so that's a good partnership.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but
the landscape is much different now. Yeah,
I think you have to be almost, part of it's you got, which is tough because there's a lot going on. I mean, my it's only a tiny film, but my regret about when I was making it was me and the producer Vinny were just constantly hustling to get gear and like the small stuff. Like for a short film, it's like who's doing the food and like what did that take away from the quality time I could spend thinking about the movie and directing it? Probably, but then that's kind of just another microcosm of being a bigger director where you have to make 5,000 decisions. But a director generally of that status then is not worried about the money. It's not their money, but money is always a big part of movies, whether you're $300 million or 20 grand. Unfortunately it's the show business, isn't it? It's like and then once it's finished, it's even worse. It's like getting it on your
that's
shelf
a whole other thing
behind you, like is the big battle.
That's a whole other thing. I mean, the financial landscape of movie making is so separate from the actual filmmaking itself that it's so much. It's like a different world. I mean, often that's kind of for people listening. That's kind of why you see so many film festivals around: Sundance, South by Southwest, Telluride. A lot of those things are. That's after the fact financing where they're trying to get distribution, which is a whole other thing. And that's more in the indie film realm and stuff like that. But even beforehand, getting financing for movies, that's why you see so many company logos or names before a movie even starts in the opening credits all of those companies have thrown in some type of backing in some type of way. So for those of you who kind of see these random companies you've never heard of, they're just kind of random production companies that finance your movies. For me, I'll never forget this. It was years ago when Martin Scorsese's Silence was coming out. And I heard that he had been trying to get that movie made for decades and could never get the funding for it. And I'm like, if Martin Scorsese can't get funding for a passion project, most people probably can't get funding for a
Yeah,
passion
yeah.
project. Even someone like Spielberg probably has to pitch and ask for funding and stuff. Even with the deep years upon years, decades upon decades ties he has to studios, um, the landscape is always changing when it comes to the way movies are made, the way the finances work. Even now, I would even say living in the post, not even post, even living in current, pandemic times, COVID times, changed fundamentally a lot about the movie business from filmmaking all the way up to physical media and everything in between. So it's fascinating to see kind of how all of that works. It's so much more detailed and takes so much longer than I think people realize. Usually movies take years in between. Um, I often hear that some directors, when they're in post on one picture, they're starting plans already for the next picture that they're going to be working on. And it's just a never ending thing if you want to get your projects off the ground.
And also, they've and I suppose everyone should. They've got lots of fingers in different pies, so they've got projects going at any one time because one of them might get attached to a director that then or to an actor that then becomes hot, and then there's sort of juice to go, but it's a complete hustle all of the time. Yeah, it's and my short film was an example. I had to hustle really hard, get it into film festivals, still hustling even today. It's what I learned, and I've been in the film industry a long time, but actually when we made the short film and then we started going through editing and finding a narrator and all of that business, and then trying to get it into festivals, and we got into a distribution deal, which ultimately was a mistake. Like, it was amazing that we felt like we knew the industry, and then of course making a film, we realized we knew nothing. We were like, it's complete. You get shafted every corner you turn around. You get sort of knocked over or conned or gatekeeped by people that, like I said, it's 18 minutes. I don't like it. There's no kind of review basis to it. It's very, very basically, and so that's everyone working, at every level. It's really, it's quite a tough industry to be creative, solely creative, because it is a business. It's about putting, now, as you say, Andrew, the business has changed. It used to be about getting people in the cinema and then putting DVDs and Blu-rays on your shelves behind you. Now it's getting you to subscribe to 5 different channels, and keep that momentum going, which I read about Disney making big cuts yesterday, and I read one of the lines was people are beginning to pick and choose. So you can, I'll take Disney Plus, then I'll cancel it. I'll come back in 2 months' time and watch Mandalorian season 3, and then cancel it again. And so the consumer is now king, because they're like, I don't have to sign up to Apple TV for life. I can take it for a month, watch all of the episodes of Severance that I need, and then go off and and I think that's really cool. But it's a very short period of time the streamers have gone, oh right, it's not a license to print money at all.
Yeah,
and
it's not
what I've
feasible.
noticed physically in filmmaking terms is that we had this real boom of streamers where everyone was going, Netflix are making 15 different shows in Shepperton, which is down the corners from me, and like they're buying this studio, someone's opening another studio. This is all in the space of maybe 3 years. And now, already in 2023, it's like it's crashing.
It's amazing how the bubble blew up so quick, and now it's imploding. Whereas,
absolutely.
I would say between the last 3 to 5 years, everyone seemingly jumped on the streaming bandwagon. all the different companies had to launch their platforms because they had to keep up with everybody else. They had to make content, constant content. And then it kind of hit a wall and they realized we can't keep up with this because
Mhm.
every single year we're hemorrhaging money. So what happens now? Now you saw all the cuts with Warner Brothers restructuring once again. You see Disney having to lay off people.
Mhm.
You see all those things kind of happening, and it's like, and then you see also the prices rise when it comes to subscription money and services and whatnot. So it's like
Exactly.
now the consumer is going to be like, maybe I don't want to pay $20 a month or whatever the case may
Exactly.
be, or I
Yeah.
want this versus that, and they start choosing. So it's very delicate time, I think, now for streaming. I don't see it going anywhere because I
Mm.
think we've opened Pandora's box to the
Mm.
future. Now it's all about trying to figure out how to make it work for everyone
Mm.
without having it all fall apart. Um, but what doesn't change is, I guess, the making of the stuff that people have to make stuff. And I guess I kind of wanted to pivot back to you, David, to kind of how you got into what you kind of, well, or at least what your IMDb says you do most of, which is location managing, location scouting, stuff like that. How did you end up getting into that part of the industry?
Well, I did English literature at university, which I now realise, or they used to tell you afterwards, it's the degree that prepares you for everything and prepares you for nothing. So anyway, so I did that, and that was great fun. And funny enough, it's interesting because I'm on a podcast. Is the most work I did at university was I used to have a radio show. So this is like mid to late 90s. A comedy radio show where I used to do the news. Of course, now if I was at university, I'd surely be doing a podcast. But anyway, it was just a side. I remember I spent so English literature degrees, you have like 2 hours a week work, physical meeting people, and then the rest you're meant to be reading and writing. Obviously I spent 3 years having a fantastic time, and most of the time writing a comedy show on the radio. But anyway, that aside, so I left university, and then I stumbled into the film industry via a film commission. So the guys that do permits and advertising, and so I got a job in the London Film Commission, and then I worked in their location library, which was all still physical media. So it was pictures on paper and boards, and it was a massive library full of these huge folders of castles and streets, and quite a physical gem, which I believe may have just gone. I mean, I know it's all digital now. I don't know if the physical things have actually just been dumped, but this library contained pictures from 70s, 80s into 90s London, and now I think it's an incredible visual dictionary of London. So I spent 2 years in that place helping people coming in, asking for stuff, and then and I'm from London, so I knew London, or I thought I did. And then I decided to leave and go out on my own. And then my first kind of real big job, I suppose, was Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, where I sort of came in and did lots of sticking of pictures, and then did a tiny bit of scouting and looking after something, and then kind of gradually went from there. And most, like film industry in the US and the UK, then you're kind of only as good as your last job. And then if you're on that job, the person goes on to the next job and they recommend you, or you go with them, and then gradually you build up. So I've been lucky that I've managed to do big films, which means they do exciting stuff. And big films now, or certainly in the last 10 years with Star Wars and stuff like that, means they generally send me around the world, which is quite good. And I suppose I did my time in London, so I knew, like I did all of the council estates and back alleys and pubs and bars and all of that kind of stuff, and Tower Bridge, and whatever anyone needed. And then gradually the sandbox gets too small, and by luck and by bad luck at the same time, I had my first child, Millie. And then 3 months later, I got a job with Michael Mann in Malaysia and Hong Kong and Jakarta for 2 weeks. And I thought, fantastic, 2 weeks with Michael Mann, this is going to be amazing. And I came back 22 weeks later. So and unfortunately, that was the beginning of the sort of second half of my scouting career, because then I started going abroad a lot, which I wished I'd been going abroad a lot when I was sort of young, free, and single.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
When you
It
had
was
all
the
the
other way
time in the
around.
world.
But anyway, there you go. That's how it worked. And so, yeah, gradually, and there's obviously a lot of films in between, but it's basically, yeah, grafting hard and getting out on the road, whether it's in the UK, and then if you're lucky, yeah, getting out on the road with someone in Mexico or Laos or something crazy like that, which is then just makes it kind of one of the best jobs in the world. I don't know, but like it often gets called that, but obviously behind it is lots of work and being away and all of that. But yeah, to get paid to explore jungles and tropical islands and stuff like that, and meet people, which is that's the great buzz, I think, of traveling, is sort of, and I'm traveling in a way that I would never do normally, because I turn up and I start working from day one, and it's usually with one other person. So that person, if you're lucky, and then most of the times I've been really lucky, you get on really well with, because essentially they're you in another country, and then you just go off on adventures, and you spend 24 hours a day with those people and meet their families, and so I get a rare glimpse of cultures and communities that I often think back when I left university. I didn't have a gap year. I don't know what I didn't go traveling because I didn't have enough money, and I feel like my payback is my job.
Yeah.
I'm on an
Universe corrected
extended
itself.
year.
So when it comes to location scouting, I mean, what's some of the minutia of what you have to do? Do you have to be a little bit educated in photography? Do you have to do some of that kind of stuff? What's the kind of day to day of that?
The day to day is different on different films, I suppose. Essentially, you would get a call, and it would be Star Wars or one of Michael's films or something like that. Usually quite early on, so that's kind of a privilege, because sometimes there's only you and the production designer, or maybe not even a production designer and the director, and with Star Wars sometimes only the finished sliver of a script and some ideas, and then you start to build a package. You obviously spend some time with the director if you can, or the production designer, and start to build some ideas about, and some of it you pick it off. So it's like, if it's a London thing, it's then X walks into a pub, and then you try and give them options, and then it's always, you're always looking for the best looking thing, but sometime down the line it becomes the most logistically or financially viable. So somewhere in between is usually the answer, because sometimes the pub interior has to be on the same day as a car chase exterior, which is over in East London. And so it's a sort of very complex patching together of stuff. Star Wars generally, which I did about 6 years in general, is different in the sense I'm usually on really early, and then you start contributing to the kind of ideas of it all, which is, where are we going to go, what's new? And that's rare. You can find anything new in the world that hasn't been traveled to or seen, and trying to figure out new planets, and and then to those countries, are they even doable in terms of the crew and financials? And so essentially you're on early, you work with the art department. So back in the old days, I think it probably would have been part of the art department. I feel like I am part of the art department, but the art department think you're part of production. So there's always that art versus commerce even there, but essentially you're there to support the production designer's vision and give him or her options to give to the director. And then you kind of and again, it's the triangle. There's lots at the bottom, and then we pick away. This is no good, it doesn't work for the story. This is no good, it's too expensive. This is no good, it's in the middle of nowhere. And then you start to, and then it's schedule based and actor based, and then you kind of, it's sort of patchwork your way towards a result. But and then the bigger movies are simpler and more difficult. We're looking for big things, so it's like, we need a jungle, so then we have to go and find a jungle, but that jungle then has to be made to work, and access and all of the sort of the behind the scenes stuff then has to be thought about. But I'm lucky that most of that half bit at the beginning is kind of exploring and taking photos. So as you were saying about photography, I mean, I think I take okay photos. I wouldn't say I'm an amazing photographer. What I think I do know is I think I do know now, because I'm a filmmaker, I suppose, as well, and I love movies. I know where the camera should be, I suppose. So, and maybe that's half the work. So when people ask me about getting into it and they hope, do they have to be an amazing photographer? Not really. I think you just need to know more about story and selling also, because essentially I'll go somewhere and I'll think it's perfect for the movie. And then sometimes you have to convince the production designer and the director that is the right place, because they can't see it until you get there with them. And so there's a lot of packaging, which physical days used to be sticking photos on blackboards and folders and all of that kind of thing. Then at some point in my career it became digital, like all of our lives, I suppose. So it's a bit easier now. It's even easier. I send you can take a picture on your iPhone now that you could never take on a physical camera and make it look amazing, and then email it or WhatsApp it to the production designer and say, what do you think? So it's kind of, even my job has slightly changed, and it can be a lot quicker. You can't disappear now for 6 weeks and ring back once a week and say, I think I found it, I need another month. Now they can say, at the end of the day, they can say, send us over your stuff, so the volume of stuff and places is increased because your access to it audio visually is a lot quicker. No,
I was gonna say, when it comes to that vision that you're trying to send to maybe the director, do you keep their like what you know about them as filmmakers in mind when you're trying to visually show them something that you think would be good for their film, like what their kind of style?
I mean, and working with Michael is, he's a lover of locations, he's a lover of real places and what they mean to the characters. He has a certain look, so you kind of you don't overdo it, because then you might annoy them. But you know what they like, obviously. And that's the first thing you do. You hear you got a job coming, you read the script, but then you start dive deeping into their work, the director's work and the production designer's work. And then so that's the great thing, is you go off in a different direction each year, and you kind of try to see what they like, what turns them on visually or even in a photograph. And sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes ultimately, you go, I think this is the most amazing place. And and Miss Peregrine, which I did with Tim Burton, I found the house, and it was a really long search, but when I saw it, it did feel like one of those stories that you would tell about location scouting. We turned the corner and there it was, and I said, well, this is it. And then he said the same when we went to see him, and he was like, this is it, isn't it? And so that's rare, because sometimes there's stuff in between that gets in the way. And but yeah, generally you have to kind of be you have to be the director whilst you're out. What
well, I was gonna say, it's a very unique thing, and it's got to be a thing that's very rewarding for you, because in a way you're things like that in films are more important than I think a lot of viewers give credit to. Some places can be characters in themselves,
right.
And when you pick the right location and the right building, or the right just interior, it can really become its own character and its own thing that sticks in your mind later on.
It's kind of essential if we're thinking about kind of the building blocks of constructing a film. Since it's literally a visual medium, you kind of have to get the visuals right at every single level in order for it to all come together.
Definitely,
it's
and that's what's it's a fascinating industry. It's all about the visual, as we said about Barry Lyndon. It's like, it doesn't matter what goes on behind it. It's that the box has to look spectacular.
It does. I
and
I
that's
wanted
yeah,
to
and that's
ask,
go on.
you know, I'm assuming you come on board a project or production really early on. Has there been moments where, you know, you've been sent off to look for some type of place or building or whatever, and then something changes to where like now it's the location of the setting of the movie has changed, or the scenes have changed and you have to kind of start from scratch again? Has that often
Al-
happened?
Always, yeah, always, because certainly Star Wars, and as a strong example on Rogue One, um, was that it, you're on so early on some films that they're even writing the script, and changes in the script then have knock on, certainly in those kind of films, to planets that they're visiting, and you can't go from one to another that has the same look. And so we spent a long time on Rogue One, and I was on very early looking for jungles for a certain sequence, and I spent a month in Mexico, spent a month in Thailand, Vietnam, had a fantastic time. And then we started focusing on Thailand, and that gave us the jungle, gave us another location, which was the beach, which was in the end of the movie, Scariff in the end of the movie. And then out of nowhere, script changes meant that sequence, which was Jeddah, had to become desert, because what was going to come before it then was kind of green, and so it was quite a basic visual jigsaw, in the sense we couldn't be in the jungle because we were going to be in green before, and we needed to have you need to know, like all films, and certainly with a location, and Star Wars in particular, you need to know, the audience needs to feel comfortable straight away where you are, you know. So you kind of, you're placed, and then you spend 20 minutes there, but you know that they've moved somewhere, you know. So that was but that happens all the time. The script changes and you swerve, and honestly, there's, you know, hundreds of locations I've found that I've gone, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and it never gets seen on, you know, because it doesn't fit, or, you know, like many different reasons. And then you just, so you can't be precious, they just go away, and then they get logged, and then you logged in your head and logged on the computer, and then hopefully if there's a sequel or another film, you can kind of spring it out of the bag at that particular point. But yeah, a lot of places get digested and left, and we move on to the next place. So it's kind of, it's brutal. So you are proud when you see it up on the screen, but you also sit there remembering all the work you did that got trashed.
I was gonna say all the stuff that was left behind. But one of the things, I know this will probably be really difficult because it seems like you've been on a lot of adventures at different places, but can you think of any really interesting situations or stories, maybe with you know, some of the places you visited, or maybe some of the filmmakers or actors you've maybe encountered, that would be something you can tell us?
Well, there's probably lots of stuff I can't tell you, but
I know, that's what I'm saying. I know there's probably a lot.
That's why I made Kubrick by Candlelight. You can see what goes on. But look, I suppose ultimately, I think I said it earlier, what my fascination is that I get sort of thrown into places, sometimes at quite short notice, and then have to kind of settle in and try and be, you know, the director and the producer and the production designer wrapped up in one for a long time before anyone really turns up. I think that's kind of the privilege, is the kind of the, you know, the secret agent jumping out of a plane into the jungle job that I have. Obviously it's much more slower than that, but you know, that's but I, you know, some of the places that I've loved, you know, when we worked in the Maldives on Rogue One, that seemed like a dream now, and kind of, it's the location that me and my colleagues still talk about, as you'd imagine. But it was quite ridiculous. Like, we shouldn't have been there. We shouldn't have been filming in the Maldives with a crew of 10, but we brought 300 people and stormtroopers and helicopters, and that was the, you know, that as an example is why some like the Star Wars films are exciting, because they have enough money and time just to kind of push, or in fact they have to push the envelope slightly, because everyone knows, you know, social media and social mobility means that everyone knows what's in the world. There's not many secret places, you know what I mean? So everyone has kind of access to everywhere. So making like a Bond film or a Star Wars film, it's quite tricky now to kind of dazzle people with a place. But I think Maldives is one of those places that does dazzle, and I think it worked really well. But it was an incredibly difficult, bizarre, amazing, beautiful place to work. But it started exactly how most films do: keep it small. We'll get in. We'll just do some visual effects stuff and just keep it, nimble, and let's get in there. And then, by the time we were shooting, it was 250, 300 people, 40 boats, helicopter shipped over in a container, stormtroopers flying all over the place, so it was just crazy. But a kind of an achievement, because no film of that scale has filmed in that area since, and probably won't, because it's just not it's not viable. But it made a great impact visually, but also it made a great impact in their kind of selling of the movie, and kind of saying that we're pushing the envelope of going to real places. And it's ironic then a few years later that we're trying to stick all of the Star Wars stuff on volumes and LED 360 screens. But that's kind of tipped over the top too, in a strange way. That's kind of we're moving out of that already. It's amazing how quickly things are moving because of COVID. I think everything just changes so quickly.
It is very fascinating how that works. Like trends in filmmaking and trends in all parts of movies, the movie world, cinema, come and go very quickly. They come and go very, very quickly. When it comes to special effects, when it comes to, like you just said, the whole volume thing with Star Wars, it was literally the big new revelation when it came to The Mandalorian coming out a few years ago, and then they make something that doesn't have anything to do with that, and you see the stark difference, and now people are picking favorites. Which side are you on? Specifically Andor, which is a continuation of Rogue One, giving that aesthetic to that world, and trying to keep that consistency.
Changed really quickly, didn't it? And I think when COVID started, and I was in the middle of the Batman at the time, so we'd already done about a month's filming on Batman, and then we were going to Liverpool, and then we got closed down that was probably in March, I think, wasn't it, where everyone was sort of locking down. Then we came back to carry on filming in September, so we had a big gap in between. And in that gap, there were certain points we weren't working at all, like everyone was locked down. And we were beginning to see the rise of the volume, and then location people were starting to think, uh-oh, this is the end of us. They don't need to go anywhere ever again. And then we were starting, hey, how can we get in on the volume? And so there was the whole world was going crazy then, wasn't it? But even in our small little exclusive entitled world, we were like, how can we get in on this? And then 2 years later, as you say, it's kind of gone, oh well, that was cool, and it works for very specific kinds of things, but it doesn't. You can't make a whole movie in it. I mean, I think people will, and I think that'll be an interesting thing. And I thought about it myself. I saw a short film that was shot entirely on a makeshift volume. It was actually pretty good fun, but it made a feature of the fact that it was using that backdrop. So that's defeat the object of the volume to a certain extent. But until a low budget feature comes out that's entirely shot on the volume, then it remains a kind of exclusive, expensive world to live in. But as I say, Rogue One was Greg Fraser, and we didn't have a volume, but we used LED screens for stuff. Greg Fraser then kind of was the kind of creator of the Mandalorian volume extravaganza, and now over a couple of films, including Batman, which he did, we didn't use the volume. We used it a couple of times for sunset stuff, which is what it's perfect for, because you can control that light, which DOPs want, but it can only get twice a day for a couple of minutes. But already it's sort of dropped off. So it's amazing. I think it's all to do with, even like we're going back to streamers and volume and all of that, it's all happened so quickly in the space of 3 or 4 years, and maybe even less than that. And I think it's all COVID has kind of changed. Pandemic has changed the whole how we're consuming products, and and I think you guys will know way more than me. I think it may have even made people more keen to get back into physical media. I think somehow.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's sort of upended everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I was gonna say, when we've talked to different labels, that's what they've kind of told us, is that they actually had definitely a boom in people wanting to buy more stuff. And so for us, that's fantastic. And I hate that it comes at the expense of a lot of pain in the world, but I'm glad to see that physical media is a thing, and we should come to that with, that's what we do on our show. Is where is your life at when it comes to I see you have a lot of physical things behind you,
physical books.
Books and things, but is physical media film something that you are also interested in?
It's interesting. I mean, I obviously grew up in video age, and my earliest, it's interesting, and this is very specific to the UK, and maybe only specific to where I lived. My first experience of physical media, and it's even hard to explain what this was, but sort of, let's say mid 80s, maybe. A guy would come around to your house. This is true. He would not come around your house, and he would have a suitcase full of videos, right? And you sit with your parents, and so that was the video shop. I don't know if I don't know. Maybe it was just specific to our family. And in perfectly honest with you, I think most of them were pirates and stuff. But it was this suitcase full of videos, and you obviously pay that guy, whatever it was, not much, and you were renting from a guy with a suitcase. And honestly, that's my first memory of physical media. Wow. It's not a bad one because it's pretty weird.
That then is a weird first encounter with physical media. Is a door-to-door film salesman.
I can remember even what I can remember, and this was really too young, I suppose. I remember watching Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence with David Bowie, and that was one of the videos that my dad rented from the video guy. I can't even know if he had a name. I'll have to ask my parents. But
Craig, it's Craig. Yeah,
and he's now probably the head of Amazon, hopefully. But maybe that's who it was. But so that was my first experience, and you kind of picked, and it was a mobile video shop. But then, and I'm sure like you, I was obsessed by VHS, and I had hundreds and hundreds of movies. And then at a certain point, this is be a sad story for physical media podcast.
Oh no,
you have to let them go, don't you? And and to be fair, as you can probably tell, I don't like letting stuff go. So I let them go, and I can't remember how I did it. I think I did, and this may be specific, but I think a lot of people do this. Is I had the videos, and then I thought I got to get rid of them because I don't even have a VHS anymore, and it's sad, and so then I think I got rid of them, but I kept all of the inlay cards, and I may still have that. And then a friend of mine, Mark, who did exactly the same. He got rid of the videos, kept the cards, and then I think maybe they've gone, and then obviously DVDs, and I was trying to think about it this morning, as the first DVD I think I ever had was The Matrix, which I think maybe because and I think it marketed it itself at a certain point. Maybe that's quite late, I don't know, but that's probably late 90s, isn't it, I suppose? But as a time, I suppose, as a film, that was kind of a good introduction to the format, wasn't it? Because it was like visually stunning, and here was this visually stunning format. So then I went crazy on DVDs, and I can tell you, and I can't move the camera, they're all still in my living room.
Oh man.
And not as neat as either of your and then obviously into Blu-rays, and then tragically, as I'm sure you discuss on your podcast a lot, it kind of stops. I remember going into HMV, which is a UK shop, which kind of disappeared. I mean, it's still around, and it'd be like, oh my god, right, 5 DVDs for £20, $20, and I'd be like, every week, grab them, let's go. And you'd be just accumulating fantastic levels of DVDs. And what I miss about them, and I still have most of them, is all of the extras, which for me as a filmmaker growing up was like the access to all of the behind the scenes, the commentaries. I think that's what we've really lost from all of what we have now, is you can get those, but you have to kind of, either have to pay for them, or you can't keep them, and it's very impermanent, and so for a lot of filmmakers, I imagine that's a loss. You can obviously access tons of stuff on YouTube about how to make this and how to make that, but one of the great things was getting that DVD. The DVD makers realizing that they had to bolster up the package, so you'd get either a second DVD. I also had DVDs that you had to turn over. Is that still?
Yeah. Flipper discs.
I think I've
call
got,
them.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think my first Goodfellas is a turnover, which is great. I think it's maybe I'm wrong, but there's definitely something that I used to watch a lot, and it was like turn over now. But yeah, so I still have my DVDs now and Blu-rays. Do I watch them? Not as much, because you can unfortunately access movies from all different angles. Am I spending as much money on streaming as I did when I was buying DVDs? I'm not sure about that. Probably less on streaming. I mean, probably more in the future because the prices are going up. Yeah. But my great, luxury and fun was, and you guys, I'm sure, exactly the same, as going in and buying a bunch of DVDs, or even then buying some ones that you weren't sure about, and then leaving them in the package too long, and then realizing 6 months later, okay, let's open it and watch it. And then for me growing up, that the middle bit was all of the access to the behind the scenes stuff, which I know still exists, but it's much harder to get it doesn't exist on Netflix. The only time I've seen it on Netflix recently, and I have to say I thought it was an amazing film, was Athena. I don't know if you've seen Athena. It was a French film by Romain Gavras, Costa Gavras' son. It's all shot in multiple one shots. It's unbelievably amazing from a technical point of view. Unbelievable. And they knew so much. They knew it was so unbelievable technically, but the film's on there, and then next to it is a 37-minute behind the scenes, which is totally rare. And I watched both straight away because the film's great on its own, but as a filmmaker, you're watching it going, how the hell did they do that? And it's weird. Netflix almost knew, and then they put this fantastic half-an-hour documentary on it. But if you haven't seen it, watch it. It's like La Haine. It's like set on during a riot on a French housing estate, but it's like some sort of medieval siege. It's incredible, but a lot of one-shot deals, and how they did those is unbelievable. But yeah, ultimately, and that's why. And what I don't have in this country is the Criterion channel. Because it never came here. But I wonder if that's the kind of channel that the real streamer that I really want, which is films that I can watch and then stuff about the films. But it's strange, isn't it? The streamers aren't really interested in. I noticed Disney Plus do it a bit with their Star Wars stuff and Marvel stuff. They'll have they'll do a B-roll hour, which is quite good. But I miss that. I miss that package of flipping it over and going, oh right, director's commentary. I haven't listened to a director's commentary now in years, and I know they exist, but it's because the DVDs, because the streamers aren't interested in you listening to that.
It seems like your job keeps you busy too, so it's tough to even for us. It's even for us hard to find time to invest in all that extra content, and that's,
or just, I guess, to watch movies in and of
even
themselves.
to watch movies. If
you're off
there
and everywhere.
It's the joke about Netflix, isn't it? And I'm unfortunately I do it every night, is you spend an hour and a half going through Netflix looking for something to watch, and then you go, oh well, I've run out of time. So I think they know that. I think they know that's part of it.
I've oftentimes spent more time looking for a movie to watch than the runtime of the actual movie,
which is
because you have so many options. The options are endless.
Yeah, and too many options, I think, and then it's Whereas, if you'd gone down the shops and you'd got, or the guy had come around your house with a suitcase full of videos.
That's the way I like it. That's what I want in my world.
You get yourself a nice Samsung.
I think I'm going to become one. I think I'm going to start a service.
You're going to become that guy.
I'm not making it up. It's not some sort of weird Proustian memory that I've made up. He did exist, and I'll have to find out what it was about. But I
Please
know it was
update us.
illegal. Obviously, it wasn't Mr. Blockbuster. It was like
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was, you know, it
it
was a
was Craig.
pirate.
It was Craig.
he
It was
was the
let's
movie
just call
man.
him that for now.
Just call him the movie man.
Yeah, but
And so what do you guys then think? Because obviously, you know, your podcast is about physical media. It's coming back, and I wonder why you think, whether it's the time or it's COVID that have done it. Why do you think it's because like people are buying more vinyl all of a sudden, and it's I think I think maybe we've been stuck in our houses. We need stuff. I don't know, or is it a reaction to streaming because it doesn't really exist? You know,
I do think that there's you know, I think there are some that there's a reaction to, like, whenever there's an abundance of something, there's always people that want to fight back against that popular thing. You know, people, you want to be on the other side of it and be contrarian in a way. But also I think people do realize that with the pandemic that that if it's not there in your hands, there's a impermanence to not a permanence to something like film, if you in the arts, if you don't actually own it. Because what we're realizing, especially a lot lately, is that even if you think you own something, you don't really own it if you're owning it digitally, because even that can be taken away from you.
We see that constantly. We see that very oftentimes where people will buy a movie digitally, whether it be through iTunes or, well, I don't even know if iTunes exists anymore, but Apple or whatever, and then they'll go back into the library a year or two later and it's gone, and they don't give you a refund. They don't,
because what it is you're buying the access to a film as long as that company has
access to it.
You know, that's what you're buying. You're not buying the movie, really.
And in a way, it's the same thing with physical media. As you buy it, well, it's available for you to buy as long as the company putting it out has the rights to it, essentially. So in a way, it's the same thing, but at least when the company no longer has the rights to it, you can still have it. Like, it's still there. You can still get it. For me and from my perspective, when it comes to kind of this resurgence of buying things, or buying physical media, it seems like there are just more people who have an appreciation for it now than ever before. They seem to have not a reverence for it, but they seem to have there's so many different facets to it. Like, it feeds the need of a collector, it feeds the need of a film fan. If you're a collector and a film fan, you get a double satisfaction, I guess. Also, you know, it comes when you can feed the curation of your own personal library. Just buy the movies you want, versus like having to jump into a streaming pool to find the things you want. You can cater it to all of your needs, whatever your needs may be. Whereas I don't think you can quite do that with streaming. Now, that's not to say everybody does that. You know, not everybody likes certain genres, not everybody likes certain, you know, movies and whatnot. So you can cater it depending on your needs. And I just think it's maybe a little fatalism, but I feel like we're reaching the plateau where physical media is maybe on its last format, so everybody's kind of hoarding it all in. You know, I've had a lot of discussions here on the podcast. We've had, Stephen, where it's like, is this 4K, you know, is 4K the end of the resolution we can sell to a mass market of consumers to kind of convince them that this is better than what you just had. You know, with the rising cost of things, how far can you push the same things over and over again? Like you were just saying, David, we went from VHS, DVD upgrade to Blu-ray, and then now Blu-ray to the 4K world. It does help that, you know, going hand in hand, movie productions have kind of upgraded along with it, going from analog cameras to 8K cameras or higher resolution now, so that, you know, everything is kind of moving technologically forward together, hand in hand. So you kind of get that satisfaction. You know, a brand new movie is going to look pretty damn good on your home theater setup, if you do have a home theater setup, and that's a whole other thing. That part of the marketing world, it's like, how can you sell these giant TVs to people now when people don't have the room, don't have the money? You know, people don't care watching on their phone. It is the same to them as watching on a large screen. So it really all depends.
And do you
think so much faster to it?
Are the big studios? They're probably not, are they? Are they still putting as much money into a DVD release?
Depending on the studio.
Yeah.
Disney is, I think, scaled back a bit, specifically over the last several years when, launching Disney Plus, obviously huge for them, put all their catalog stuff on there versus physical media. They don't have to spend as much. Yeah, but some companies are still putting out a quantity. I mean, Warner Bros. I think is celebrating their 100 years of
Yeah, I saw
of
that.
being a studio. So
Yeah,
now
yeah.
they're like, here's commemorate
Yeah.
100 years
Yeah,
of Warner Brothers. Here's the same movies we put out on Blu-ray before, but it says
yeah.
100 years
In a
on
pack. Yeah.
it. And,
Well, and then there's like Paramount, who seem to have decided that now it's important to do it. Paramount had a lot of their back catalog kind of has been in limbo for a long time, and now they're putting out a lot more stuff. And
yeah,
they even,
they've woken up
you
over the
know,
last few years to put out a
yeah,
lot of their back catalog because they have such a rich catalog.
Yeah.
Universal has been putting out things right along with Universal licenses out to a lot of other smaller companies so that I guess like they can handle the whole production side of it when it comes to physically making, the discs and all that kind of stuff. Sony has Columbia's back catalog, so they've been delegating that out to different companies over the years. Some other
but
companies are like a question mark to me. It's like
yeah,
Amazon now owns part of MGM. So it's
Mm.
like, what's going to happen with all of that? Disney now
but
owns,
but
20th
the
Century
whole,
Fox.
but
What's
that
going to
whole
happen with that?
overall, yeah, but that whole overall like experience of what a boutique label seems to do seems to be your best experience with physical media these days, because the investment that a major studio is going to put in even their own product when it comes to features and things is still not really. I mean, there are exceptions, but for the most part, these boutique labels, whether it's Arrow Video, Criterion Collection, so on and so on, they're the
Eureka,
ones
Second
that,
Sight.
they're the ones that are honestly really, it seems to be, you're getting your best investment when it comes to physical media. So
They'll acquire the distribution rights, and then I guess, depending on their size, they're the ones who pay for all of the extras that you're talking about. The
Yeah.
commentaries, the
yeah,
making ofs behind the scenes, or go get the stuff that may already exist out there they can get their hands on.
Yeah.
They're kind of a middleman, kind of a saving grace middleman, really, for a
Definitely.
lot
Yeah.
of this stuff.
And is it more expensive than to produce the DVDs, or is it still relatively, you know what I mean? Because if you're a big studio, they were obviously pumping them out and saving money.
I think from what we know, we don't run our label, but from what we are told, it's not a business you make a lot of money in.
Yeah.
So they are, a lot of these labels, I think, are running on passion. It's a lot of passion. It's a lot of
Small companies.
Small companies. And just really, some of them, I think, endear themselves towards preservation. They like to, they actually are making new, they're restoring films. They're keeping them alive. That's the Criterion Collection. They very much are in that business of preserving and even going to theaters and showing the movies again. And that's a lot of what they do. But then you have other places like, Imprint out of Australia, who don't do restoration work, but they do create a lot of contextual things to help make the movies, getting a more wide experience of these films. And they're also getting a lot of films and putting out a lot of things that haven't seen the light of day in a while. So there's different labels that have different
agendas
or their
motivations,
abilities, so some have more money to invest in preservation, and others are able to just put that money towards contextual stuff and getting you a nice package and putting it out into the world so you can have it.
It is, and I guess some of them are rather limited. A lot of the things we talk about only have 1,000 copies in existence. I guess keeping costs low and demand high, really, because usually people see those numbers and they get kind of nervous.
Or excited because then it becomes something to cherish, isn't it? It's physical,
very much so.
It's limited. So
and I think that's what perpetuates it a lot is this not wanting to miss out. And
I think there's an exclusivity. There's an exclusivity to physical media now. Like you're part of some secret cool club, that spreads around the world. That you just feel kind of like, you have an extra, pep in your step because I have something that no one else has.
Which is strange because, 10 years ago,
no one talked about it.
There were DVDs everywhere, and like they were just flying around the
They
place.
couldn't give them away.
10, but it moves so quickly. I wonder what the next step is in 5 to 10 years time. I'm sure the streamers and the studios are trying to figure it out themselves, but something's going to happen.
I think something's going to happen with like they have to figure out the streaming issues they're having right now. I think that'll dictate what happens.
Yeah, but I do want to go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, I think it's only my opinion. I think the next big thing is really, and it won't involve physical media. So I think is them starting to buy each other. It's going to eat him.
It's already happening. Yeah,
it's two of the big ones are going to combine, and then you've got no choice. That's where it's going, isn't it?
We hear merger stories all the time now, and because it keeps happening. Like Disney buying 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox was around for a century, and then all of a sudden, boom, all gone off the face of the map.
And of course, the Warner Brothers Discovery thing going on right now. That merging. And figuring out how that's going to exist,
how that's going to kind of persist.
And then
going forward.
Amazon and MGM, but I think it'd be more like a couple of a Titan's going to buy a Titan or combine.
I've heard.
It must be logical.
I think Apple's the next. Apple's going to be the next one. Yeah, they're going to buy something really big.
As it is, soon. Some of them are starting to buy movie theaters, so they're trying to get put their foothold back in that realm. Yeah. For years and years, that used to be completely separate. Like studios or companies could not really own studios, and then
now that
they reversed some type of case.
That role has been taken back. Yeah,
they threw those roles into the trash, and we're like, now it's opening up the floodgates. So who can own what now, and who can manipulate what? The theatrical experience, I think, is also a completely different arena that's still ever changing. I know when the pandemic started, like we've been saying, that it changed everything. We thought movie theaters were gonna go away.
Exactly. Yeah, and everyone's back in there, and
now everybody's back.
Yeah,
it's not like it was. But it's close enough to
it's persisting. People. It's persisting. I think people with the absence of it completely, basically, you start to get a little bit romantic about it a little bit. I think it's always going to be there. I think there's just going to be more limitations and less theaters, and I think there's always going to be people that value that experience. Even though other people can make that experience not as good.
Yeah, I think
unfortunately.
Yeah, I think filmmakers ultimately may be the ones who save it. I think it have saved it. Remember when Warner Brothers wanted to put everything on streaming? All their filmmakers were like, "We didn't sign up for this." Christopher
well, they
Nolan
lost Nolan.
One of the big ones.
They lost Nolan. Yeah.
His whole thing is the theatrical experience. I mean, David, you've been on his sets, you've been involved in his productions. Those movies are made, on such a scale that they have to be exhibited on that on the big screen.
But it comes down to money at the end.
It is, yeah.
And actually, in a strange way, it's money, and then for the filmmaker, it's a certain point where it's like, and my film, the tiny film, as an example, is you just want to get it out there. So we got trapped in a distribution deal, and all I really wanted out of it wasn't a couple of quid every month, which was nothing. I wanted as many people to see it as possible, but I didn't realize that until I'd signed the piece of paper. But ultimately for a filmmaker, it's like, of course, it needs to make money so you can get another show, but really you want as many people to see it in the best way possible, or any way possible at a certain point. So, you see some names of filmmakers sort of signing up to streaming, and you think, well, that's just because they're getting enough money to do what they want to do, and it's getting out there, and people can see it, however that is. So that's what's behind filmmakers' choices. It has to make just enough to get another go, but you want as many people to see it. So on that subject, my film will be out soon.
Hey, I was going to say, hopefully, because is there ever been a talk? Well, I know you're having issues with getting it out there just in general, but like, is there ever a thought of the film having some type of physical release, or maybe being attached to maybe another, like maybe a Kubrick film. Maybe if they re-released a Kubrick film, could they attach
Yeah, I mean,
your film?
it's been attached a couple of times. If it gets attached to Barry Lyndon, then you're in for a very long night, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it has been shown with Barry Lyndon. I didn't go to it. I was at the festival, and I thought, not even I am going to sit through nearly 4 hours. But anyway,
Yeah.
I know it's got an intermission. And then you've had Chris O'Neill on from the Triskel Cinema. He
Yeah.
very kindly put our film together with Filmworker, which was the film about Leon, the documentary about Leon Vitali, which was quite a short documentary. So my film fit very nicely, and subject matter obviously fit very nicely. But yeah, I do get asked about DVDs, and I might even have a look and see how expensive it is to make a batch. But ultimately, but then so I suppose I'm saying the same thing, is ultimately I want it to get out there and for as many people to see it, and then try and get reaction, good or bad.
Definitely. Yeah. You want to hear more people.
We know what the internet can be like.
Oh no. Yeah, that's with it. That's with being any kind of artist and putting yourself out there. Before we finish up, I do need, one more thing about your film. We got to know about how you got Brian Cox to do your narration, because that's one of the first things that you hear in the film is you hear his voice. I'm like, oh my God, he got Brian Cox to do, and of course his narration is not only like a straightforward narration, but then there's kind of a breaking the fourth wall, talking to the. So yeah, tell us about getting Brian Cox to narrate your film.
For a long time we had Liam Neeson.
Oh wow,
it would have been pretty cool. And in the original script, there's a love scene in the film. Remember, they're kind of making out, and then it pans, and there's a little visual kind of Mel Brooks gag with someone playing a harp. The original idea was that it was the narrator who was standing in the corner, so he was narrating the love scene, and then it would pan to Liam Neeson, and he'd be standing in the corner. At a certain point we knew that was never going to happen with anyone, let alone. So then we went a long way down with Liam Neeson, and it didn't work out. And then I sort of started going through a list and emailing people. It's funny because I keep looking over there because Brian Cox's biography is just on the other side of my computer, so he's sort of looking at me. But and then we had a list, and I emailed his voice agent, which I was lucky because it wasn't his physical agent. I don't think it would have happened. And she said, he's he likes Kubrick and Barry Lyndon, and he likes the script, and he's got Irish heritage and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, this sounds promising. And then like a day later she rang me and said, yeah, he can do it tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God. So then we had to speed around to get a studio in Soho for him to come in, and X, Y, and Z. And then he very kindly came in. And the reason he could do it is fantastic, because he came in, he did it. He was looking at the film, and he was like, "Oh, he didn't realize he was in it as much." So he was sitting there doing it, and like you said, he was narrating it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm." And of course, it was post production, so Dara, who was on screen, was he was trying to fit, he was acting, and I started to get nervous because I think he realized it wasn't just, I can just do a bit of narration and leave. He had to do a bit of business. And so then he got into it, and he really liked the film. And we talked about Kubrick, and we talked about Michael Mann, because of course he had worked with Michael as Hannibal Lecter. And so we had, it was good. And then I kind of got down to it, and I sort of said, I didn't ask him why he could do it, but it got around to that. And he said, oh, I'm under contract with a new HBO thing, and I can't do anything else. So I'm sort of just waiting. And of course, that HBO thing became Succession. Now, if I emailed his agent now, I suspect I wouldn't have got a response. But so bizarrely, because of Succession had been obviously stalling to start, he couldn't do any other acting work. So he was like, this just came up, and he was like, that's quite fun. And he did it. And then I think literally like a week later, he went off to New York, and they started filming. So after that, I would never have heard from him ever again. But so it was a bit of good timing and good luck, and good luck for me, because obviously he's brilliant anyway. But now he's had a sort of renaissance, second wind as an actor, and now he's.
And now we just need to get your film out there to
Now
help.
we need to get that film out there, and obviously sell it as a Brian Cox film. Obviously,
of course, Brian Cox stars, voice stars.
Put him on the poster.
We did. There's a couple of posters. Yeah, that you can't. That's the original poster, but all the other posters have got this red strip across the corner. You got to sell them. Introducing, including Brian Cox.
Yeah.
So, in any way possible, you've got to sell these things. But yeah, so he was really nice and very, and he's brilliant in it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I funny enough, when we recently talked to John Allen Simon, he had done an interview with Brian Cox for Out of the Blue physical media release, and he just seems. I'm glad to see certain actors and filmmakers that seem to be really actually showing their passion for film and not just kind of being in movies and stuff. I like seeing when people that are in it are showing their actual passion. Filmmakers like Edgar Wright and Tarantino's and people like that really they hold up the history of film so that people don't forget about it, because I think there's always this sense of looking forward to the new thing, and especially in today's world, and not looking back at what influenced these things, and not reminding people that there's this rich history of film that you can go back to and look at, and that's what physical media really does for us. I think that's
and that's the sort of danger for the next generation with not physical media and streaming, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because even my kids, they don't really care about films. Do you know what I mean? Like they don't.
Yeah.
They might love them, but they don't own them. So there's sort of a lack of connection.
There's a disconnection. Yeah.
Definitely. So I think that may cheapen the art form going forward, because it's just pure content. It's like, I'll watch 2 minutes and Netflix registers that 2 minutes as interest, but you wouldn't leave the cinema after 2 minutes.
Exactly.
I always
I always, and you guys can come at me, but I always kind of describe streaming as the fast food of film watching. It's the quick and convenient way to get to things, and it is a nice tool to have, especially for us, because we weekly talk about movies that are getting announced. Sometimes you can't find them, so we need to use streaming as a tool to watch a lot of these films, even when they're in crappy conditions. But I don't think it should. I don't feel like it should ever be the preferred way to watch things. If you have access to a physical disc, or if you can go see it in the theater, that's the way I think you should seek out seeing something, and at least for your first experience.
It's obviously it's tough based off of everyone's situation,
everybody's situation,
living situation, financial situation. Streaming is, for parents with young children, streaming has probably saved their lives.
You know this, Dave. You know that. You know.
Definitely. Disney Plus has paid for itself. It's fine. It's perfect.
Yeah.
But they do get. They either watch something over and over again, which is fine.
Yeah.
But they don't. Yeah, there's no love for it, and also you're then at the mercy of the algorithms telling you what to watch next.
Yeah.
Whereas, kind of, even in the DVD shop or the guy with the video bag, the suitcase, you take a chance. Like you can take a chance online, but actually most of the time Netflix is kind of telling you, based on what you've touched or what you've watched, what you should watch next. And I often go onto Netflix and go 1950s movies. It's not many, obviously, as you can imagine.
No.
They are trying to expand. They are trying to expand that world. I think they've cottoned on that but there's a handful, literally, but there's nothing there really. And honestly, young viewers won't find that. They're not going to go looking for it. But it's not going to come up on their home screen, is it?
I think the fun for not older generations, because Stephen and I don't think consider ourselves old, but the fun for me is the seeking out of cinema, like searching for it. So, going deep, doing a deep dive into just like back catalogs of directors, back catalogs of old Hollywood stuff, because you'll see the same movie show up over and over again on streaming services or on best of lists in quotes, because it's all, subjective. And it'll always be like the same movies, like Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, Citizen Kane, all these kinds of movies. But it's like if you dig a few deep layers lower, you'll find like just buried treasures of amazingness. And sometimes you lose that when you only have access to a small pool, or when you don't really, have the inkling or the urge to kind of dig deeper. You're just kind of be susceptible to that algorithm and be susceptible to the way in which the apps want to push you. There's always like, this is what's trending now, this is our top 10 most watched, this is top 10 in this genre, top 10 in that genre. And it's like you lose a little bit of that excitement, at least that I got in discovery.
Definitely.
And I think what you can do to combat that is, I guess, yell at the younger generation and like, tell them about it. Not yell at them, but you know what I mean? Like, hey, you guys
introduce
like
them
this.
to stuff.
There's
Yeah,
this.
Yeah. Well, I think what's important is, and this is what I'll advocate, is that I think with the younger generation, typically when their attitude is typically when you're young, you like to have, you're all about your individualness, like being an individual, being unique. And I think that you got to keep doing that. You got to keep trying to be unique in every way you can, and not try to be trendy, not try to be, trying to just watch what everybody else is watching. Try to be different. Try to, listen to some different voices, try to find some different things, and just keep that. That's what I push forward in every aspect of my life, is to not try to, not just to be contrarian, but to feel like that I'm a unique person. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm getting caught up in the machine of what everybody else thinks. I like to listen to different people's voices and make up my own mind, and not just the same voices and feel like I'm a robot. And I think that's what a lot of these conveniences do, is create this almost like roboticness. Like you said, they don't really love movies. They're just kind of consuming them
just to consume them.
Yeah.
It's like those big Netflix movies and I haven't worked on any of them, so I'm not going to annoy anyone, but they're big ones, and then they say 900 million people have watched this, and you just think, but can you remember one of them?
Yeah.
The one I'm thinking of is it Red Notice? Or there was like
Red Notice was the big one.
They put these films out and they say it's the biggest thing that's ever happened to Netflix, and then a week later everyone's just like, did you? Is that the one with? There's one with Ryan Reynolds, and that's Red
The
Notice,
Rock, and Dwayne Johnson.
Absolutely appalling. It's just rubbish.
That's another thing.
Mastery in filmmaking or whatever, but
that's another thing with streaming.
Amazing, and then it's gone.
Yeah, with streaming is the constant consumption and the pace in which you're consuming it. You can go through entire television series in a matter of days. You can go through dozens of movies in a matter of a week. And are you consuming any of it? I find myself falling into that with a lot of television. Is I'll watch a season of a show, and then the next season will come on a year or two later. I can't remember anything from the first season that came out before, because I watched it in a day and a half, and it's just to move on to the next one.
What's funny is streaming's even like almost rediscovering the proper way to watch things, because you got a lot of these streaming services are like starting to do like one episode a week again. And it's funny that they're like, it's like this a new thing. It's like
everyone forgot that's
literally how TV was before.
That's how TV is still.
And now it's even going back to let's release one a week. And now it's like, and also you can buy into having adverts. So you think, hang on, we've just flipped around just to having normal television again, but we're just paying for it in a different way.
Streaming is not even slowly. It's gotten to the point where you're just back to cable or satellite television. It's the same price wise. Now they're introducing ads like you would see on television. I mean, the only thing good is, I guess, if you pay more, you don't get ads, but still the cost goes up, so you still end up paying. So it's
the weekly thing is obviously a desperation to keep subscribers, isn't it? You know, I noticed with Andor, which they struggled with, but in the end, I thought it was very good. They struggled with it and then gave away the first 2 episodes after the season had completed. They gave away 2 episodes to another. This was in the US, the other channels. So they were desperate to get people to come over and complete the set.
Yeah.
But the weak thing was definitely to make sure that you just don't subscribe for a month and then bounce. It's
Exactly,
like you
yeah.
subscribe for 3 months. And so the consumer's always going to be, the big business is going to be ahead of you, but the consumer will figure you out pretty quickly too, won't he? And
Yeah.
as I said, they're just picking and choosing and taking and, you know, what they want.
Yeah. And
And
this is an ever expanding
it's
conversation.
ever evolving.
Forever, yeah.
And there's a lot of tightrope walking going on right now in the world of entertainment.
Definitely.
Yeah. But David, I feel like we could continue to talk to you for a long time, and maybe, you know, I would say we should bring you back, and hopefully next time we bring you back, we could be talking about your
Whatever
film.
new things
Yeah,
you're working on.
Your new things, or Kubrick by Candlelight finally getting some type of distribution or physical release. I would love to bring you back for that. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's been great fun.
Great. Yes. Thank you. If we can only leave our guests with not being annoyed by us, that's our greatest success.
That's a good theory. Yeah.
If you're not,
great fun. Thank you so much and I'm glad you enjoyed the film, and it will hopefully be out.
Yeah, it was great. For those of you listening who aren't familiar with David O'Reilly and his work, chances are you have. If you go over to his IMDb, he's worked on such films as little film called Inception. He's worked on a little film called Rogue One, Solo: A Star Wars Story, Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, as well as the Batman, and then upcoming projects as well as a host of other things that you've all probably seen. It's a lot of things, big things.
And we were talking about this before. If you go look him up on IMDb, a lot of David O'Reillys.
Yes.
So
you may want to look for his movie.
Location. Yeah, it's one of the first ones. It's like location manager, location scout. You'll see it there, or
just look up Kubrick by Candlelight, and you'll see his name right there. Click on it, and then you can see everything.
Definitely. But David, thank you for the conversation, and we'll see you around.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Andrew.